extend a thank you to Calit2's and the team that both put this program together and in general supporting entrepreneurial energy in Orange County. We need it, we have it fortunately, and we all benefit greatly from it. One housekeeping bit of news, unfortunately Dr. Kain, who's one of the panelists today, unfortunately he's a doctor. Unfortunately doctors have emergencies and he's not going to be able to join us today. But what I'd like to do is give you something to think about. When you're later walking around through the exhibits looking at these devices, I want you to think for just a moment about these devices from my perspective. What would you do to try to protect them? Because if you can't protect them, you can't fund them. And if you can't fund them, the device is never going to get to the marketplace to help patients improve health care. So I'd like to give you a hypothetical NUCO and walk through some of the issues that are confronted by eHealth companies particularly and medical device companies in general. The hypothetical company sells a wearable heart monitor, and the heart monitor has a Bluetooth module so that it can export data to your cell phone. The cell phone communicates that data off to a remote facility where a physician can observe the data and perhaps provide a feedback. You can see there's an arrow going back to the smartphone. Where the physician might be able to advise the patient to change the medications in response to the data, or maybe even directly program the device online. So the question becomes, what would you do to protect this technology as a company? And certain things are obvious and some are not. For example, of course, if you sell the box, you've got to protect the box. Get patents on the box, on the monitor, sub-assemblies within the monitor, potentially an interface with the patient. But the problem becomes, if you look at the business, oftentimes this is the case, the very box you sell hundreds or thousands of one-time use disposable. And fortunately for this NUCO, there's a disposable patient interface in order to provide adequate coupling between the heart monitor and the patient. It might be acoustic coupling, electrical coupling, mechanical coupling. And it only lasts for a day or two or three and it must be replaced. So if the revenue stream for the company is really coming from the disposable patient interface, this is a non-starter, even though you have patents on the monitor, because the competition is going to supply one-time use disposable interfaces into your installed base of heart monitors, and the business is not going to be very valuable. So you do the next obvious thing and you say, well, let's get patents on the system of the monitor plus the interface. That way, when a competitor sells an interface into your installed base of monitor patients, that patient reestablishes the claim combination. That used to work, but nowadays we know very clearly that this does not block the sale of disposables into your installed base. And the reason is that when you sold the monitor, the patient acquired an implied license under the rest of the components in the system to use it for its intended purpose. So what you have to do to protect this income stream is get a distinct patent or patents on the disposable. And you'll find it's interesting that some people think that the most valuable patents are the patents that follow the problem that was the hardest to solve, or the problem you spent the most money on in R&D. And that's only randomly the case. The most valuable patent is the patent on the thing that the competitor wants to use to compete with you in the marketplace or to generate revenue, to steal your revenue. So in a situation like this, it's exactly the case, and we see this with some frequency. The silly, silly low-tech part that just gets sold like razor blades at 85% gross margin, that's the thing you've got to focus your IP on. Okay, what else? Well, the smartphone app, there's going to be software in there. You can get software patents. You can get hardware, you can get utility apparatus patents. And typically, they're available at one scope or another. If you designed an app that does something new, let's say in this case, it takes raw data from the wearable heart monitor and converts it into a medical record, which is actually something that it's closely regulated. It has to conform to certain standards. And then it transmits the medical record to the medical facility. Suppose you can get a patent on that. You may not want to. And you got to look at your business model. You don't patent stuff just because you can. You got to look and decide, does it give you a strategic advantage? And it might not. If you're in the business of selling disposable interfaces to wearable heart monitor markets, you might not care if everybody else has access to your smartphone app. You also obtain patents on combinations of the system, sub-assemblies, assemblies. And one is very hot right now in the law of patents is method patents to the overall system. It was quite common in early days of electronic medical record transfer and other e-health applications to seek a method patent that covers the entire field. In this instance, it might be a method that says applying a heart monitor to a patient or placing it in communication with the patient, receiving data from the patient, transmitting the data to a remote site, and interpreting the data, and then maybe dependent claims would say, and taking some responsive action as a result of the interpretation. That claim has no value right now, even though it covers exactly what this business is trying to do. And the reason is that the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, which has ultimate jurisdiction over these questions, has said that the method is only infringed if a single person accomplishes every step in the method. And in my hypothetical, the patient probably put the monitor on. Maybe the doc did the first time, or a back office nurse. But the patient puts the monitor on, and the physician accomplishes the last step of interpreting the data. There's no infringement to that claim. This is on appeal at the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit right now, and the law could change, but it creates a little bit of a challenge for some of these companies. So claim strategies to consider. When you're looking at these technologies, just consider not just you get a patent on the box. You get the box, you get sub-assemblies within the box, systems that include the device, methods of making the device, which sometimes are mundane, sometimes are quite valuable, certainly methods of using. In the United States, often a method of treating the human body is the most powerful form of patent protection because it's divorced from the details of the hardware that's utilized to accomplish the method. Genus and species. If you invented strawberry ice cream, you don't just want to get a patent on strawberry ice cream. You want another one on ice cream, you want another one on milk products, you want another one on frozen milk products, or whatever the patent prior art will allow. Genus, species. You must consider who is the infringer because you write the patent differently depending upon who in the system. When data is rocketing around between different facilities, different people in the system might be considered to be the infringer depending upon how you write your claims. And finally, but probably most important, what is your revenue model? You've got to keep that in mind in creating a patent strategy. But remember that when you're looking at these things, you've got to have a way to block the competition from entering a competitive marketplace. Otherwise, you can't get funded. If you can't get funded, the patient's never going to see the product. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to the real reason you came here tonight, which is to hear a very distinguished panel give their perspectives on this technology, on this technological area. And just so you're not surprised, we're not going to do lengthy bios. We found that the panel is so distinguished that it just embarrasses the rest of us to hear those bios over and over again. So they're going to get up one by one and give their presentation. We're going to, after that, have a series of a little bit of time for question and answer, and then we'll get to go and watch the exhibits at a later time. Thank you.
Good evening to everyone. I'd like to extend the welcome to all of you. Before I start the presentation, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our distinguished speakers and all the researchers who are going to do the demo after 7 p.m. for their contribution to make a successful program. I'd also like to thank our strong supporter, Knobbe Martens, for their continued support to Igniting Technology series. And that is how we have such a wonderful events to get together to discuss all the current events in research. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of you, the audience, for spending time visiting us and allowing us to exchange ideas with you. Your input will be so valuable to our programs. And this is in tonight's topic on Igniting Technologies about eHealth Collaboratory. And please allow me to give you a very brief introduction of eHealth Collaboratory. So what is eHealth Collaboratory? It is a technology and health collaborative laboratory to answer demands from user of healthcare technology. The user group include patients, families of patients, physicians, nurses, healthcare givers, and community organizations as well as insurance companies. They are the user of the healthcare technology. And our vision in our eHealth Collaboratory is to develop, demonstrate, and deploy technology solutions for application in health and wellness through collaborative multidisciplinary research. By riding on mature advanced information technology, wireless communication infrastructures, and low-cost consumer electronics for the sensing, embedded system, and so on, we believe we will help to empower people to manage and improve their health and well-being. And it will assist with diagnosis, treatments, and management of health problems. By using such a low-cost electronics, it will lower the cost and the barrier associated with the quality healthcare deliveries. And also we will bring the quality of healthcare and the quality of life to more people in more places, such in the remote area or in the underserved areas. And lastly, and most importantly, remember that we are not treating people as lab rats. We will enable people to live with dignity and independence regardless of their health condition. That is a very important aspect of our collaborative work. So how do we fulfill our visions in all the settings? So what we will do is to take a holistic approach to understand the healthcare needs in its delivering and receiving, as well as to take a multidisciplinary approach in coming up with healthcare solutions. To understand the user needs, it includes the patients and the family, and also the caregiver and physicians and the specialists and the nurse and so on. Also, we need to understand their behaviors, the social behavior and the user behavior in using technology. And in the technology side, to come up with a multidisciplinary team approach, it involves the information technology, telecom technology, engineering, and cognitive science, and neuroscience, and so on, as well as to understand the market demands and the business model for the solution. By having these two teams working together, we will come up with a high-touch healthcare technology that is personalized to enrich users' experience. And that adds value for those delivering healthcare and as well as those receiving the healthcare. So that is the approach, is really understanding the user need and also understanding the technology developments. By having these two teams working together, we will have a holistic solution, and this is really to develop affordable and high quality of healthcare solutions. So in tonight's presentation program, as well as the demo afterwards, you will see this program is not about to invent a new gadgets or a fun toys in a laboratory. It is about developing a solutions by taking an integrated approach involving technologists, life scientists, and the users. And that solution will transform the way we deliver the healthcare in these generations. So in the following presentation, we have two faculty members representing technology side to give a presentation, and physician to present a view from the healthcare user point of view, as well as a representative from business and market community. So I will turn the podium to the first speaker, Dave.
Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the future of rehabilitation, exercise and movement training, and to sort of ground the talk. This is a picture of what a current rehabilitation or clinic looks like. So you can see it's fairly bland, maybe a computer in the background, not very exciting. I want to disclose to you, I'm a co-inventor of a technology that's sold by a robotic rehabilitation company in Hoekema, Switzerland. Okay, so in this talk I'm going to imagine what rehabilitation might be like if I have a stroke when I'm 70. And I'm going to focus on how robotic devices and information technology might be used. And you can imagine similar scenarios for other conditions. And then if you want to read, I'll put some references to some great work at UCI that is supportive of the concepts I'm talking about. So this is going to be in the form of a story that I'm going to read to you. So it's September 23rd, 2036. I turned 70 yesterday. I wake up around 2 a.m. with a headache and get up to use the bathroom. I fall as I get out of bed. I can't move my left arm or leg. My wife recognizes the symptoms of a stroke and rushes me to the hospital. In the hospital, I undergo brain imaging, and a doctor confirms that I have an ischemic stroke, and I receive clot-busting and neuroprotective drugs. In my hospital room, a rehabilitation therapist attaches small robotic stimulators to my fingers, tongue, face, and foot. The devices push on my skin in rapid rhythmic patterns for the next 3 hours. The doctor tells me they will stimulate blood flow reorganization, opening alternate arterial pathways to perfuse my brain. I can't walk and I can't move my hand or arm. The doctor explains that the neuroprotective treatments and sensory stimulation are helping, but there's still a lot of damage to my brain. She explains that my brain has a lot of potential for rewiring itself if I work hard, and she expects a full recovery. She explains that she will be using a cocktail of stem cells, drugs, and an implanted brain recorder stimulator to enhance my brain plasticity. Later today, she will take cell samples from me and induce the cells to become pluripotent stem cells. She will use a micro-robotic device to deliver these cells to the site of my brain damage, as well as to implant a small electric stimulator in my brain. A rehabilitation therapist emphasizes again that a full recovery will require a lot of hard work. She explains that she will design a movement training program for me that is based on my genetic profile, the pattern of damage to my brain, and the specific stem cell and direct treatments I'm receiving. We'll start tomorrow. Later that day, after my minimally invasive robotic brain surgery, my rehabilitation therapist brings in a small electronic device and attaches it to my shin and another one around my wrist. She explains that these devices will keep track of how often I'm moving my hand and leg. She downloads an app on my cell phone that shows me my chances for recovery based on a database of thousands of patients who are similar to me and underwent similar treatment. The app reminds me to try to move my limbs periodically with an alarm and set specific target numbers or repetitions for me. I still can't walk or move my hand. Day 3. I wake up and my bed transforms into a wheelchair. It has a robotic arm exoskeleton attached to it, which my therapist attaches to my arm and hand. The device responds to my intention to move as measured by the electrodes implanted in my brain, so I can move my arm and hand a little better, but it's still difficult. My therapist explains that this is intentional. She wants me to have to struggle to move to help my brain reorganize itself. She explains that the assistance is set on high for now, but that she will be decreasing it soon. With help from the arm exoskeleton and coaching from my therapist, I use my arm to roll my wheelchair to the exercise room. There are several rooms with large 3D displays there, and several patients in each room. Are you ready for the holodeck, Captain Picard? My therapist says with a smile on her face. The therapist wheels me into the holodeck and teaches me how to stand up. The chair helps me as I try to stand up, but it's still difficult. She attaches a soft harness to my pelvis, which is tethered to a robot on the ceiling. She also attaches a lightweight robotic exoskeleton to my impaired leg. She tells me these devices will allow me to safely practice standing, bouncing, and walking as I exercise. She tells me that as I get better, they will actually perturb me so that my brain can learn better how to correct for the movement variability caused by my stroke. She interviews me about my favorite sports and activities and about what type of work I want to do when I get out of the hospital. I tell her I'm an avid golfer, but a terrible dancer, and my wife would love it if that equation were a little more balanced. I'm also a teacher and need to be able to stand and write on a, I should say, whiteboard, I guess, in the future, so chalkboard. She sets up a simulation for me in which I can play virtual golf. The robots help me bend over to place the ball, balance and swing, and I walk on a treadmill on a 3D virtual golf course after hitting each ball. She tells me I can learn how to drive a car tomorrow, but for today I'm walking. She asks me to play around with another patient in the room. She explains that the system will handicap us to approximately the same level, so it will be a good match. I'm not as good a golfer as I used to be, even with help from the robots, but I play 9 holes and beat my partner by 2 strokes. He challenges me to a sailing race tomorrow on the holodeck. I'm tired, but the time flew by while I was playing golf. Later, back in my room, my therapist tells me that she analyzed data from my golf session and that I began moving my leg, showed some balance reactions, and improved my hand movement ability today. She shows my progress to me on my cell phone app and notes that I moved just over the target amount for today. She says that after the sailing race in the morning, we're going to try to learn some dance steps in the afternoon. My wife will be my partner. Days 4 to 21. Each day I work hard at getting out of bed, walking, transferring to the toilet, and using my arm. My therapist tells me my robots are helping me, but I'm skeptical. This is tough work, and sometimes it seems like the robots are challenging me even more. But it's fun too. I've been practicing golf, sailing, and dance. I actually think I'm getting better at dance, and I've started practicing standing and writing on a chalkboard as well. My therapist shows me data on my cell phone app that indicate I'm making good progress. I can move my hand a little more, and I stand up each day without help from the wheelchair and take some steps with my therapist helping me. Day 22, my therapist explains that it's time for me to go home. I'm medically stable, my movement return is good enough that I should be able to keep practicing moving with a little help from some devices she gives me. One of these devices is a lightweight exoskeleton for my hand, and the other is a lightweight exoskeleton for my leg. She explains that these devices will be assisting me in walking safely and in using my hand, but only as much as I need to get around and to get jobs done. They'll keep turning themselves down as you get better, so don't get used to them, she says. She shows me also where I can access a holodeck in my neighborhood. It's not as nice as the one in the hospital, but it's still pretty fun, she says. And you can work out with some of the friends you made in the hospital through the network. She shows me how we will keep in touch with the video conferencing program on my cell phone. She says she'll be watching my movement data. Don't even think about becoming a couch potato, she says. I spend my days working on retraining my movement with help from my exoskeletons and my local holodeck. I video conference with my therapist a couple of times a week using my cell phone, and I visit her weekly. I keep track of whether I'm meeting my target practice amounts and types with my cell phone. I can also see that the amount of assistance from my exoskeletons is decreasing, and I'm getting better. Day 90, my therapist lets me know that it's time to get rid of the exoskeletons completely because I can move well enough to keep using my limbs without them. I'm still a little weak and uncoordinated, but I will work hard and I know I'll keep improving. So, just some of the key ideas that I tried to put in that little story are that robotics and information technology will be used for early sensory stimulation, brain surgery, and movement training. They'll keep patients safe, allow engaging, meaningful practice in a social context. And they'll help the patient as little as possible, in some cases increase the challenge so that learning is better. They'll be matched to the patient's profile and the selected neuroregenerative treatments, enhancing the effectiveness of the treatment. They'll measure what practice has done and its effect. They'll avoid learn non-use at home by serving a smart assistive role. And they'll be powerful tools in the hands of creative clinicians who are skilled in their use. So just to conclude, so what's next? So I'm starting a center called iMove, which is, there's about 30 faculty at UCI who are committed to work to restore mobility for the millions of people with a physical disability. And then the eHealth Collaboratory here will be a key collaborative space for this work. Thank you.
I have a little bit different take on the Collaboratory and some of the work that's being done there. And my name is Jeff Russell. I'm in the dance department and assistant professor of dance science. So I have some interesting things to share with you tonight that I hope you find as interesting as I do, because they're actually quite fascinating. This poster is upstairs in our lab, and it really is amazing what a body can do. I'm a healthcare worker myself. My field is sports medicine and dance medicine. I've been taking care of dancers and athletes for about 30 years, and it really is fascinating. And so it's just exciting for me to be part of what's going on in the Collaboratory and here in Calit, and to have been invited into this very esteemed group of scientists and collaborators. Well, first of all, you might say, well, who cares about science and health and artistic performance? Well, if you wear shoes like this and do this, and it looks like that on an x-ray, you care about it a lot. And that might not necessarily be anyone in this room, but there's a lot of young women that are doing this. There are a lot of violinists who are going through hundreds of thousands of repetitions of bowing across their strings. and others in all kinds of performing arts. And they have one of the highest injury rates of any type of physically active people. And so this is a real problem, and they're executing high performance, high physical activity. And particularly because of the overuse issues, they have lots and lots of injuries. What we know is that there's a lot of injuries that performing artists have. But what we still need to learn a lot more about are the demands on the musculoskeletal system that are placed by performing arts. How do the repetitions and how do the demands on the body result in injuries? And then how can we reduce the injuries with still maintaining artistic integrity? You say, well, just don't dance on point. But point is part of ballet, and you don't take that away. And so there has to be some other solution that we can find. So this is some of the underpinning that has informed my work and my professional field. Some of the things that I've done, I've looked at ballet dancers standing on point using MRI so that we can get an idea of what does the ankle and foot look like when dancers are standing in this particular position. And this is a masthead from an article that I published last year in Acta Radiologica about this work. It's very, very interesting. This is what it actually looks like. These are some of the images. And heel bone, just to give you some reference, heel bone, and your foot's down here, and this is your shin bone here. But this ankle joint goes through an awful lot of stress when it's in that particular position. But if we don't do this kind of research, we don't get to see this, and we don't understand it as well. And that's what makes it really, really exciting, is you come up with an idea, a kernel of an idea, and you turn it into something that actually helps people's lives. That's what I like to be involved in, and that's what we're doing here all across the work of Calit2 and in the eHealth Collaboratory. So what I did is take some of this professional field of mine and got together with some others that are from more of the pure sciences and engineering. And I developed this concept that I call the Shape Lab, Science and Health and Artistic Performance. And so what I'm going to do is unfold a little of that for you and show you some of the work that we're doing and then what you can tour through upstairs. This is the motion capture part of my lab that is on the third floor here. And the thing that we're doing is not so much developing new technologies, is we're taking technology and applying it to solve real problems that people have. Another thing, I was talking with Dr. Bachman the other day, one of my colleagues here, and we were discussing why is it interesting to have artists involved in endeavors that are so heavily entrenched in science and engineering. And really, his conclusion, I didn't have to give this to him, and by the way, I'm not an artist, I'm a scientist, but I work with artists and I'm in the arts school here. But he offered that he appreciates having the artistic creativity around to help solve problems because it brings a completely new perspective many times when we're addressing some of the issues that we're working on in research. Also, and I'll give some specific examples of this later, a lot of times the research that we're doing on artists actually can transfer over into other populations. One of the types of work that we're doing is on balance stability. This is one of my students, Tiffany Yu. I should point out that I don't have access to PhD students because we don't have a PhD program in my department. I get a lot of really, really excellent mileage out of some fabulous undergraduate students and some master's degree students. And Tiffany's one of my graduating undergraduates who's done great work with another young lady in the area of balance and looking at dancers versus non-dancers, looking at hard surfaces versus squishy surfaces, looking at how people are able to stand and maintain balance under various circumstances. Now, one of the things that we can do is take some of that work and then apply it to populations that we know really have a lot of trouble with balance, and for instance, some of the elderly. And so that's what we want to try to do is take work that we're doing with artists, but then open that up and invite other clinicians and researchers in so that we can understand a lot more about balance and how some of the things that are working in favor of good balance in dancers might actually help someone who has some balance problems because they're perhaps older, perhaps they have some type of degenerative disease. Another one of our really interesting collaborative projects is this insole that we've been designing. This has been being worked on with my lab and then Dr. Bachman's biomedical engineering lab. This is one of my undergraduate students, Allison. You'll be able to speak with her as well upstairs. She's going to have her insole there and talk about how we've developed that to put into a tap shoe, because there's a lot of tapping, a lot of impact on the feet. So we've got these different sensors, and then there's also accelerometers on there, so we can measure how fast is the foot hitting the floor, leaving the floor, what are the different pressures on the different parts of the feet, so that we understand more about injuries. And then we'll take this and we'll develop a model that can be put into a point shoe. We'll develop a model that can be put into a soft ballet shoe, and then can be put into any other type of shoe. And it provides a wide variety of information that helps us understand demands on the musculoskeletal system. So that's a great example of arts working with science. Very, very exciting. This is a photograph that's come out of the magazine that you've been given, the Interface journal there that you have. And this is Kumio, one of my master's degree students, and you'll be able to speak with her as well. And she's got reflective markers, and you see these little dots on her. So she's got these reflective markers on her, and inside this motion capture system, we can collect data about her movement. Anything or anybody that can move, that you can put a marker on, you can track with this kind of a system. And what we're doing is not just working with dancers, but also working with some instrumental musicians, performers. So here you can see a dancer who's got the different markers. They light up. They're not lights, they're reflective, and so they light up when you take a flash photograph. But this is a jump study that's being done, not in my lab necessarily, but I want to give a good picture of a full body array of these markers. This actually is some work that we were doing upstairs, and which we'll have on display for you. And each one of these little circles is a marker, and this is the pelvis, and then down the legs, and you can of course see the feet. So this is actually a dancer, and we can calculate, once we have all of the data collected and have identified the anatomical locations of the markers, we can look at velocity of movement and forces and angles of joint movement and things like that. So it allows us to be able to understand, again, movement in a very, very intricate way. And this is work that's just now, we're really just getting our lab up and running because we've been able to get some new equipment for this type of work. And then we can apply that to instrumentalists. And so here's one of my students, Yvonne, and she's a violinist. And so we believe that there are differences in the way bowing is done in violin when you have pain versus when you don't have pain, or when you're a novice versus an expert. And if you can understand what the differences are under those conditions, then you potentially can train people in a better way, and you can also design physical training programs that will help them to reduce the incidence of injury. So anytime you can reduce injury and you can prevent it, it's much better than having to treat it. And so that's something that we're doing with instrumentalists. And then this is the first time that we know of that a wheelchair dancer was ever evaluated with motion capture. And we did this work a couple of months ago. One of my students here, a master's degree student, he had a relationship with this, actually the world's first integrated dance company where you have wheelchair dancers and able-bodied dancers. And this is the founder of the company, and she came to Irvine, and we put her through a variety of physiological tests and put her in the motion capture studio, and just took a bunch of different images of her moving in a variety of ways. This has been used in a wheelchair before, but never in a wheelchair dance, and so we're very excited about this case study just to see if it's possible and see how it will work out, and then from there we can move and do some more work with a wider population in their company. So those are some of the things that I'm working on, and it's very exciting to be able to share that with you. And Of course, we'll have the panel, and then the students and myself will be upstairs, and look forward to meeting with you later. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. I'm a pediatric neurologist. I became interested in telemedicine about 10 years ago. Just for a functional definition of telemedicine, it's been defined as the use of information, electronic information, and communication technologies to provide patient care when distance separates the participants. I became interested in this because I saw that a large number of my patients did not have access to the medical center. They were not being enrolled in clinical trials. They were living in communities where doctors did not necessarily have the expertise to treat their condition. And it's interesting that telemedicine perhaps started 45 years ago in the area of neurology and psychiatry. And that's been the major emphasis of our work to date. At UCI, we've had 2,100 telemedicine clinics since 2001, 8,400 consults. And we're working very actively with what is called the California Center for Connected Health and the California Telehealth Network. Here is a map of the California Telehealth Network. And within the next year, there are going to be 830 rural clinics who have submitted a letter of agency to the center, to the California Telehealth Network. And all of these clinics will be wired to UCI and to the other 4 medical schools in the UC campus and the UC system. So in terms of testing new technologies, inviting people to participate in trials, there's going to be a very large network available. In addition, this network is going on the backbone of what is called the National Lambda Rail. This is a nationwide network for communication, so theoretically it would be possible for a doctor at Emory University Medical School in Atlanta to do a telemedicine consultation with the patient, say at Inyo Valley Community Clinic. So we have the equipment, and we have the technology. Now the question is, how are we going to develop a sustainable operation? There have also been a number of metrics that have been developed by the UC Office of the President. These are listed here, making sure the system covers latency, jitter, and you can read down the list of metrics that are required for quality control in telemedicine. Now I want to step back for a moment and just kind of give you my perspective of the field. And the next 2 slides were developed by Professor Mark Bachman a couple of years ago, but I think they're still very relevant. One of the problems we have technologies, we have too many niche solutions. We have lots of gadgets. You'll see a lot of gee whiz tonight, and they're out there. But the question is, what is going to be the common standard or platform to integrate these devices? Many of them are not practical. Many of them are too expensive. So the technology strategy that has developed at Calit2 has 3 simple objectives. They're trying to integrate the technologies. So the technologies will function as an integrated system, not just solving a problem, but working well together. Second, they will utilize consumer and IT-based standards that are already in the market, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, media devices. And then, perhaps most importantly, is to simplify the human interface. We get the patients, they need to be able to turn it on, make it work, and not require any advanced understanding of computers. Now, this doesn't come across clearly, but this is another example of where I think telemedicine is going, and this is the so-called smart home. So you see that you've got a user, patient, let's say in this case an elderly patient, and you have ways to monitor all of these different aspects of functioning. It's connected to the hospitals, it's connected to safety services, and it's connected to services that are relevant to daily life. So the smart home is a home that is wired with technologies to promote health. And functional monitoring, safety, physiologic monitoring, cognitive sensory support. Dr. Reinkensmeyer gave you some examples of how that might look, security, and actually a way to increase social interactions of people who are isolated in their homes. So what are the features of a smart home? Well, there's a way to remotely environmentally control windows, doors, curtains. There are ceiling sensors for falls. There's a device where a simple pot can be placed on the floor, spread out a grid, and by infrared sensor determine whether someone is falling. Unusual patterns for activities of daily living, cooking, if someone is getting confused. There are memory glasses that have a GPS positioning, so confused people who wander in the neighborhood, there is a way to track them. There are smart shirts. These are not shirts from Nordstrom's. These are shirts that have all kinds of sensors in them that can be then relayed to a server. There are implantable glucose sensors, and you've already heard about robots. So these are some of the features of this. Now, let's look a little more critically at what are the advantages of this. Physiological measures can predict health risk. So this is a potential savings to the health system. As GP Lee indicated, these systems may empower patients. They may save travel time and medical costs. They may prevent hospitalizations. Our gerontologist tells us by singing bottle caps or whatever method we use, if we could improve medication compliance with seniors, we could save 20% of hospitalizations for Medicare. That is a huge savings to the healthcare system. There would be better medical management, and ultimately, at least theoretically, these systems are compatible with the electronic health record. But now, what are the challenges of this system? One of the challenges is a mismatch between the technology and the patient. So many of the technologies we see are part of technology push as opposed to demand pull. So a supplier gets a device and wants to push this device and sell this device, and in the course of this you actually get a mismatch with the patient. So the system ends up not working at all. We do not have a good way for exchanging with the protected electronic health record. There are maintenance costs for these systems. We have to be extremely aware of a sense of privacy in the home. This is an example in which the technology has gotten ahead of policy. So we do not have a legal framework that has actually caught up with the technology. And I would say this last one, in my view, is the most significant. We need to determine how these interventions impact health outcomes. It's not sufficient to show that they work. It's not sufficient to just get data on them. We are going to be required to show how they impact healthcare. So the objectives, let me see if I've, So as we move forward in this area, we need to look at perhaps the 4 tenets of a health outcome study. Does a potential health-producing input have an effect on health? What is the direction of the effect? What is the size of the effect? And what is the mechanism that produces the effect? So we are told that e-health and telemedicine is the future of medicine. So we need to proceed down this road very carefully. We need technology development, such as available from faculty at Calit2. We need doctors involved, and they have to be convinced that they can use these interventions. We need industry. We need capital. We need the law school. We need the business school. And wherein but a research-based university can we find all of these components? So I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope this will begin a dialogue that will allow us to proceed down this road in an integrated manner. Thank you very much.
Okay, good evening. I'm Rob McCray, and this is not my first slide. There it is. I head up the Wireless Life Sciences Alliance, so we've gone from scientists to non-scientists, with one more to come behind me. I wear two hats. The Wireless Life Sciences Alliance is a trade association with a mission. The mission is to accelerate innovation in wireless health, and the goal is to improve access to health and health care. I also head up a San Diego-based charity called Alliance Healthcare Foundation. It's a private foundation that spends about $3 million a year on medically underserved and challenged populations in San Diego and Imperial counties focused on healthcare, on their health and healthcare. So in that role, I'm a buyer. We make an innovation initiative grant of $1 million each year to collaborations that promise to solve problems in innovative ways, tech-enabled or not. We make other grants as other foundations do. So I kind of wear those two hats. I've been in healthcare for a long time. My topic was business opportunities in wireless health for academic researchers. And so in a sense, that's what I do with Wireless Life Sciences Alliance, or WLSA, and that is to create an environment where the organizations and the individuals who will create successful businesses and services in wireless health can come together. We started this organization 6 years ago, hold an annual conference in San Diego that kind of covers all aspects of the business case, and then last October, working with about 35 universities, create a scientific meeting. And it's all based on my personal experience in business, in healthcare, and that is that the way that businesses are created successfully is by finding partners, by finding individuals who can help you. And that is still a process that requires a lot of effort and requires people to actually come together, in a setting, in an analog setting, even in a digital world. There's a reason to do that. So just quickly, those are most of our members today, and you can see if you kind of look through that, that it ranges from very big, well-known companies across all aspects of wireless health, and that's technology. So Qualcomm was our founding sponsor. Healthcare, Johnson & Johnson was another founding sponsor. And now the end user, the consumer, that's the long tent pole in this whole area of success. It's the end user. And increasingly, it's not doctors and nurses and clinicians and hospital administrators, it's us. So if you think about how to be business, how to have a successful business, how to make your innovation, your knowledge, your talent, how do you put it to work and create a business, I think a couple of things. One is first start with a problem. Identify the problem you serve. You've heard Dr. Lee, several people kind of say that in different ways. But it's fundamental. The purchasers of healthcare want solutions. They don't want devices. They don't want parts of solutions. And increasingly, we're moving to a world where a consumer, a customer, business or consumer wants a problem solved. At our recent meeting, I think one of the most noteworthy comments was made by the head of the Procter & Gamble team that heads up their service businesses. And a lot of people don't know they have it, but they have pretty significant healthcare business here in the US and in Europe. They're also building some service businesses around their other brands. And so here's the biggest, very best-known consumer products company in the world. And they have a plan that in 10 years, every one of their brands will be associated with a service. Okay? So that's really compelling. That means the company that kind of understands consumer markets better than anyone else recognizes that consumers want something more than just product. They want more than just type. They want something that goes with that. So that's the first thing, is kind of focus on a problem. The second thing I would urge, if you want to think about what am I going to spend my time doing, what kind of business opportunity am I going to create, is do something that is going to increase access to care and going to lower the cost of care. That will put you in alignment with the needs of every nation in the world, of 7 billion people in the world. And with cellular connections now, you can have access to the biggest distribution channel ever created, and it's 5 billion going to 6 billion cell phone subscribers with personal devices that can ring them up and vice versa. And virtually the entire world's population is accessible to a cell phone, even if they don't own it. That village in South Asia or in Africa, which means when you think about telemedicine opportunities, they can be delivered in the most remote locations in the world, by a small device. And it can be a 2G device to begin with. It can be voice and text. And you can start to actually move the needle. So think in terms, that's what the world wants. There are lots of other business principles that maybe Vijay will talk about. Who pays and how do you regulate and IP and all that. And those are all really important, but just I kind of give you the higher level here. So just in case anyone is interested, we do have our second wireless health conference. We'll have about 700 people this year. We'll have NIH, NSF, Department of Defense, FDA, peer-reviewed papers. It'll be about 20 peer-reviewed papers selected by the Technical Program Committee, which is a fantastic group from around the world. And we're creating an environment that I think over time can be very relevant for this space. And by the way, we're based in San Diego, but we consider Orange County to be part of San Diego, and even parts of LA. Now we're expansive. We're completely. I was at Calit2's at UCSD yesterday, or maybe it was the day before. Citrus is a collaborator. I love Harvard. We love MIT. We love everyone. We're trying to bring the best together in this setting, and then the dialogue continues throughout the year outside these meetings. So let me back up. So then I thought, okay, what am I going to do? We got researchers. I thought I'd pick 3 companies out of our community that, just as examples of, they're companies that are based on research done inside a lab, a facility, usually funded by state and private money and federal money as UCI. So the first one is Dexcom. Dexcom is a continuous glucose monitoring company. Maybe some of you know it. It's a public company. It's reached about $1 billion cap on pretty small revenue. But it's doing well, it's growing well. But the research was the notion of an implantable sensor that the body would not reject and that could measure, make the appropriate measurements. And this actually was research was started in the University of Wisconsin in 1967. I had to look that up. I don't memorize all this stuff. 19 years later, we got to market with the first version. And FDA approved it for a 3-day wearable device measuring 250 times a day. Big improvement over stick yourself 4 to 6 times a day, and the average is more like 2 to 3, because it provides you data. The utility of continuous monitoring around a key parameter, such as blood glucose level, where you try to keep it within a range, because if you go too high or too low, it's bad for you in the long term. So the utility is there. So dial forward from 1986 or 87 when they launched, another 15 years, and they're on version 7, I think it is, in terms of comprehensive systems. FDA's approved it for 7 days wearable. They're in the market, they're growing, they're doing good, they're trying to figure out the next step and what else to do. So that's an example. It's a very valuable company. It's providing a very valuable service. It's going to do more. Their sensor technology is now being recognized as being relevant to other disease states. So they will do well. So that's an example. But I thought for you researchers who are in the 20s and early 30s, a couple of other examples would be maybe more interesting. Neurovigil happens to be a San Diego-based company. Philip Lowe is the fellow that created the core technology and started it. He wrote a dissertation for his PhD at Salk. He's an MD and a PhD now. And it was a little under a 1-page dissertation. And it was an algorithm. The algorithm takes the output from a single lead external EEG and basically provides an analysis of your brain activity. So first I heard that, and he showed me how this displays. I thought, wow, you can just put every sleep lab out of business. Because you could probably get to the point where you could diagnose sleep apnea, disruptive sleep apnea, and get people to therapy without ever having to go to the lab. Where he's gone with it, though, the other ramification of this is that you can now readily measure the impact on brain activity of therapeutics, chemicals, biologicals that are put into the body. So what does that mean for the pharmaceutical industry? It means to me that every therapeutic that has any potential for having an effect on the brain is going to have to be tested with this device or something like it, because the FDA is going to want to know. Now, maybe there's new therapies to be found too. There's going to be lots of other ramifications, and that's the direction where he's gone. So, at age less than 30, he's got 3, now he maybe just turned 30. He's got 3 pharmaceutical companies, majors, using this platform in different stages. So that's different from the 35-year-old slogging through the FDA story. So I thought that's a good one. And then the final one is dual fertility. This is out of University of Cambridge, UK, England, UK, Cambridge. Again, started by some students in collaboration with some other experts. But their core technology is a sensor, wearable, now in a wearable patch, that little thing at the bottom, which is about the size of between a quarter and a 50-cent piece. And it measures internal body temperature very accurately. So this did sort of start with, well, we got this technology, what can we do with it? And they talk to people and say, that has something to do with fertility. So Seamus Hushir, who's a New Zealander with that unlikely name, has the best opening line in company presentations for, that I've ever heard probably. And he says, hi, I'm Seamus Hushir, and my job is to get millions of women pregnant. Because what they've done with this is take that technology, pair it with a wireless device that collects the information, gets it to the cloud, and back into a data center. The data center also has a call center attached to it where you have the expertise. So there's expertise in the algorithm and in real people staffing this data center. And basically, with these measurements and the advice, it tells the woman when to call her spouse, significant other, and say, it's time, get home. And the effectiveness of this service, this tech-enabled service, in women that have failed on IVF is equal to IVF for those who haven't failed. It's remarkable effective. They've published this, and they've got more work to do. They're selling over-the-counter in England today for £500. The National Health Service in Britain pays about £5,000 for IVF. Do it for 10, so equal effectiveness, 1/10 the cost, that sounds pretty good. And in England, they said, but if you don't get pregnant after using it for 12 months and following the protocols, and by the way, they know, because this is, collecting all this information, you get your money back. So it's like going to Best Buy to buy a TV, and if it doesn't work, you get to take it back, right? So bring that to healthcare, but with a credible product and service. So again, they did this with about £2 million on the market, about £2 million total investment so far. And they're only in a small market. The National Health Service is chasing them now, saying, well, we want to do that. And so they're working those arrangements out, and I suspect that will happen. So I used, those three companies as sort of examples, polar extremes. Sometimes, people have, you just have to slog through the entire normal U.S. medical device building problem in order to achieve a goal. And if that's a personal goal, that is great. And that needs to continue. But in the case of neurovigil, that illustrates one thing to think about. Is there something you can do that will take a generic or a cheap or consumer device and turn it into a valuable service or product for healthcare? Because if you can do that, it's much less capital intensive, and your cost of goods is much lower. With dual fertility, it's really more, these are all, they had to make up everything here. None of this existed. They assembled parts that were available. But they just thought really well about what's an ideal problem. Where can we get traction for this technology first? Where we can really show benefit. That was one thing. That was one insight they had. And then secondly, this device, this little bedside device, I've seen a lot of things in 10 years that I've been doing this. It's probably the most elegant wireless health device I've seen. And they didn't use IDEO, or they didn't use Insight PD. They used a design team of students out of Cambridge and spent about 5,000 pounds on it. And it's beautiful. Apple could have done it. Production quality isn't quite that good yet, but it really looks well. So anyway, just creativity in different ways. I'm thinking about lower cost. Investors, I will tell you, love capital efficient businesses nowadays. So I'll leave you with that and see you afterwards.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Vijay Gurbaxani. I'm the director of a center called CRIDO, the Center for Research on Life Team Organizations. Very different from the other academic presenters ahead of me. We don't build technologies, and we don't know a heck of a lot about healthcare. But we do know a lot about, much of what we study has to do with the contextual use, the contextual surrounding of technology, so you can maximize the return on investment in technology. So what we study primarily is how do you drive return on investment in technologies, particularly ITs, and then kind of how do you increase that return by taking into account the contextual factors. So these are social, environmental, business, and so on. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about. I've also taught in a healthcare executive MBA program for 10 years, so I'm extremely familiar with kind of the specific challenges that I think the medical community faces, or the healthcare community more broadly faces, around some of these challenges. So first, I mean, just to set the stage, I don't think anybody needs to look at this slide particularly carefully, but this is just to give you a sense of the scope of devices and technologies that are out there. And so when we tend to think about computers, we're obviously thinking about laptops and desktops, but also kind of mobile phones, wireless sensors, any number of technologies that are out there that are all collecting information out there. And in fact, one of the big trends these days, what you've all probably heard about, is kind of this whole notion of big data. How do we actually kind of analyze the data that's out there? McKinsey, the big consulting firm, just came out with a report last week that talked about big data and talks about it as an equally important factor of production, like labor and capital. So they're arguing that people who understand how to work with data better will be far more productive. So what I want to talk to you about, and I want to kind of frame this discussion kind of at a level that is somewhat higher than any one of the innovations that we've seen so far. And most of us who work in my center are either kind of sociologists or applied economists and so on. I'm an applied economist. And what we talk about is this notion of a general purpose technology. So general purpose technology is something that's much broader than a specific technology. So picking on the colleagues who spoke earlier, for example, some of these things, the robotic arms and so on, are specific technologies. They help you kind of do one particular thing extremely well and are extremely valuable as well. General purpose technologies are a little bit different. They tend to be kind of very far-reaching in impact and extremely broad in their scope. So standard examples that we use are electricity and information technology, for example, and obviously also the internet. But let's just kind of think about this for a second. For electricity, for example, what people don't necessarily realize is it took 30 to 40 years for the impact of electricity to really be felt. Because it's not just about getting power to the factories, for example. It's about how do you reorganize your factories, how do you move the machinery around, and so these are all kind of changes that came particularly slowly. Electricity to the house was another great example. If you think about information technology, there's a lot of different stages that happen along the way. But the main kind of point that I want to drive home about the value from these technologies is for general purpose technologies, is that they don't generate a benefit on their own without a whole set of complementary things happening along the way. So when we start thinking about telemedicine that Dr. Lott was talking about, if you don't have the complementary advances in regulation, so the interesting story from many years ago is when, I think it was Iowa or something like that, I think it was the Mayo Clinic wanted to kind of see patients in Iowa over a telemedicine type link. They were sued and said that these doctors don't have licenses to practice in the neighboring state. So you need regulation. So without these kinds of complementary changes, you don't often get the impact. You need people to change kind of the way they actually behave, and this can be particularly challenging as well because we're all used to kind of doing business a certain way. When you start thinking about simple things like the use of technology, some of the complementary advances we're talking about is, there was a very famous paper written by an MIT professor called Don't Automate, Obliterate. And what he basically said was if you take a standing business process and you automate it, you get a certain kind of payoff. But you have to recognize that the process wasn't designed with computers in mind. So the process was designed taking into account what people already knew how to do. So you're automating things that people already knew how to do versus redesigning the entire process. And that gives you an order of magnitude improvement in the economic impact of these technologies. Now, what's really kind of neat and cool about general purpose technologies is the notion of increasing returns. So let me kind of spend a minute on that. Most things that you invest in, most technologies that you invest in, you've probably heard of the concept of diminishing marginal returns around most investments. So the idea is for the first $100 that you invest, you get a certain amount of return. For the next 100, it becomes lower and so on. So basically, returns decrease for a whole, you can't keep getting value. So, the first pair of shoes that you buy, you enjoy, you buy the second pair of shoes, but if you get to the 100th pair of shoes unless you're Melvin Marcos, that's not particularly useful, right? It doesn't give you a lot of value. Now, what's interesting about these general purpose technologies is they lead to increasing returns. And what I mean by that is that not only the returns do not decrease over time, or with scale of investment, they actually go up. And that is where the real power of these technologies are. So why would something that you already invested in give you additional returns along the way? And the easiest way to think about it is think about buying an iPhone, for example, and using an iPhone. With every new app that gets developed, the value to you from an investment that you already made increases, right? Assuming you want to use the app. So the idea here is that you spent $500 on your iPhone, you got a certain amount of value for it, and without spending one more dime, you keep getting more and more value simply because more and more apps are being built. So that kind of is a measure of increasing returns. I think the internet is another great example. Many of us can already make the investment in the internet with every new store that you want to shop at, making something available to you that gets more value. So more and more businesses get built around. Great examples are kind of the highway system and so on. So these are really, really powerful technologies. Now what I'm going to argue is that wireless technologies, and I should probably kind of label this talk, my big kind of focus right now is wireless healthcare, but I could have equally well labeled this talk connected healthcare because it did lead to much the same idea. But the notion is there's a communications infrastructure that is extremely powerful, and all the way from the mobile phone to kind of the wireless infrastructure. And the other piece that I want to emphasize is the cloud. We haven't talked much about the cloud, but I think these two technologies are particularly complementary. So the reason your smartphone is as attractive to you as it is, with all the apps on it and all the data that you can get, is because you have a wireless infrastructure and because you have a whole bunch of cloud-based services, apps and data available to you, right? So when you start thinking about any kind of application, be it Gmail, be it map function, be it Yelp, I don't care what it is you use, or any of the healthcare apps that we've been talking about, it's this combination of these two technologies that I think come together to yield amazing amounts of productivity improvement. And I think it's important to recognize that one without the other, the cloud without the communications infrastructure is meaningless, and kind of wireless applications and technologies with it. So, a smartphone doesn't do very well on 2G infrastructure, even though there are obviously some uses for it. So I think that is something that we want to think about. And I think what many of the people in this room are trying to do is leverage these infrastructures to try and bring to market their products and their innovations as a combination of these. And Rob alluded to some of them, and if you spend some more time with Rob, you will learn kind of about the number of interesting companies that he had up on a slide, but obviously didn't have time to talk about, that are all kind of relying on kind of smartphones, wireless sensors, communications infrastructure, cloud-based services to deliver value to all of us who will clearly be patients or help, at some point in our lives. The later the better, but I think that's our reality, right? So this is going to be, this is a slide borrowed from the West Wireless Health Institute, but you probably can't see it very well. But it's basically kind of the ecosystem for healthcare, particularly the ecosystem for connected healthcare. So it's the smartphone, its applications, its data, and so on. But all of these things need to come together. So one of the things that we do kind of in the business school kind of is abstracting away from the healthcare context for a few minutes. Most businesses, most industries, I should probably say, you can think in terms of what we call a value network, right? So you think about, let's say, Walmart. I'm just making an example. So Walmart would be somebody, for example, that's a network leader, because they're kind of the dominant player in their industry. They're who you and I do business with if you shop there. But then they've got kind of, for example, suppliers. So all the suppliers are very tightly integrated with Walmart. They obviously have competitors. They've got complementary services for the freighting services, the freight service, and so on. They work with them. And if you look at most industries, that's what we're talking about. Now, if you look at healthcare, think about it, all the different players that are now actually, so the one that comes to mind most obviously is kind of the physician, the hospital services, labs, and so on. So those are kind of the service providers. But then you've got the payers. So if you work for the University of California, as many of us in this room probably do, that's the payer. Then you've got insurance companies. You've got a whole kind of ecosystem that comes together. Medical device companies, pharmaceutical companies that all come together. Pharmacy benefit managers and so on that come together in this value network so that you and I can consume health services. Now, what's interesting about any kind of innovation in a connected world is your strategies for going to market have to be quite different from if you were doing something that was simply independent. So if you to talk about the robotic arm again, kind of who are you selling to? You're selling to kind of somebody, you know, in a rehab unit that kind of needs this technology. You're displacing an existing technology, and that's hard enough, but it's not as challenging as what I'm about to speak to. So you think about kind of the Sony Walkman, for example, served a particular service that displaced whatever came before it, but you were not disrupting an entire ecosystem. Now what's happening in industry after industry, we operate in these ecosystem-like environments, and when you bring a connected product to market, you have to think about the impact on the entire ecosystem. And a lot of companies have failed because they haven't thought about the ecosystem impact. There's a network impact that we have to think about. One of the best known examples is this company called Covisint, which was founded by the three big auto companies. It was General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, and then I think Nissan joined as well. And the reason it was basically creating an electronic platform for trading between these auto companies that bought parts and supplies from suppliers. And so what happened was GM would go to pick a company in Bridgestone and say, we want to buy tires from you, you need to interact with us through our electronic exchange. And then similarly Ford would do the same thing. They said, look, you have to do this electronically. It's too expensive to do it any other way. The problem was GM was using one system, or Ford was using a different system, Nissan was using yet a third system, and the supplier basically said, you can't realistically expect me to support 4 or 5 different standards so I can trade with each one of you. Why don't we develop a common platform? Sounds great in theory, right? So they set out and designed the platform. Here's the joke, it took 1 year for them to come up with the name, Covisint, and then all that happened was they fought for the next 2 years, didn't do a darn thing, and shut it down. Because what went wrong, you had 3 or 4 major auto companies who don't particularly like each other very much. You compete with each other very, very aggressively, and you're asking them to agree on standards. So there's no way you're going to come to a reasonable agreement. So if you don't take into account the industry structure, you're really not going to be particularly successful in situations where there is a whole ecosystem that you need to think about to actually kind of be successful. And as one of our speakers said earlier, if your innovation doesn't get to market, it does not help the patient, right? And so I think that's some of the things that we have to talk about. And so there's been a lot of work done on this, and the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how do we think about the world differently when you think about you're trying to disrupt an existing kind of product service with a better product or service, but you need to make a change to the ecosystem. And this is kind of simplified game theory, if you will. And basically what you have to do is visualize kind of the end state equilibrium. So you have to think about, if all goes according to plan, what does the equilibrium look like? So 5 years from now, you're very successful. Who needs to do what to actually make your product successful? So physicians need to adopt, payers need to pay for that particular technology or service. Compensation, by the way, in healthcare is a huge reason why many of these innovations don't see the light of day, right? We cannot change the way people. So healthcare is the only industry where if you perform a procedure poorly and the patient comes in for the second time to get the procedure redone, you actually get paid twice, right? So the payment mechanism, the payment system is very, very kind of convoluted in healthcare. It creates some very strange incentives, which most of us wouldn't accept. We even think about airlines, which we dump on a lot. I mean, when you miss your flight due to bad road, they do put you on another flight for free. Right? They don't say pay us again for the air ticket. Well, that's what happens in healthcare. And I pick on airlines because that's about the industry that most of us don't like very much, but those of us who travel a lot. So figure out what the equilibrium is. Complement power players as often as you can. So the idea being, who's got power? So a lot of times it's young, innovative companies that we're going to take on the big guys. And that's really hard to do because the incumbents have a lot of stake. And so it's not always going to be possible. Where possible, you really need to think about complementing the power plays. Switching incentives is very interesting. So most of these innovations that we talk about have the features of what we call a two-sided market. A two-sided market is where you need 2 sets of constituents to actually play in the market. Buyers and sellers. The easiest example is think about a dating website. Right? So if you only get men, you don't get any women, that's not going to be particularly successful. And if you only get women and don't get very many men, you're not going to have a successful dating website, right? And so when you start thinking about this, you've got to think about, I need both of these players, both of these sets of constituents to actually join. Now, in the dating website, it's roughly equal, I would argue, but in many other cases, you've got to think about, how do I get? There's a chicken and egg problem. Why would I adopt if nobody else is adopting? I'm not going to get, so the simplest way to think about it is, why would you ever want to be the first person in the world to own a video phone, right? And so actually the true story is the guy, the first person in the world who bought a video phone actually bought 10. And he gave it to his entire family, right? And so it's that kind of thing. So you really have to think about, and usually there's one side of the market that needs to be given a switch on. You have to pay them to actually switch to something else. You have to make it worth their while. And if obviously, given how much uncertainty there is in this industry, you have to preserve kind of flexibility around where you go with this. So let me kind of stop there, and kind of what I basically want to, there's obviously a lot more, there's not a lot we can get done in 10 minutes, but what I want to kind of alert you to is, if you are the leader of a company or a scientist working on these technologies, you've got to think through kind of where your product, where your innovation, where your company actually fits in the overall ecosystem, and how you can actually make that successful by taking into account the industry structure, by taking into account the incentives of the existing kind of payment mechanisms, by taking into account kind of what is driving all of the different players in the industry, and can you actually change the behavior of so many different players in this ecosystem. So with that, let me stop there and turn the floor back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Now our speakers are going to come up to the front table and will address questions from the audience. So please feel free to address questions to the panel generally, or of course to individual speakers to the extent that it may relate.
Question for Dr. Lott. Curious, doctor, if you've heard of a group called 3G Doctor out of the UK?
Yes, I've heard of the group. I don't know much about it.
Okay, they seem to be doing physician to physician as well as physician to physician to patient consultations, but they've chosen to basically not try to build their own network and use existing protocols and existing systems. They seem to have gotten there pretty quick.
Yeah. Interesting idea.
I believe we have a question in the back.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. McCray with regards to, maybe the whole panel, with regards to digestible devices. A lot of the devices that you showed up there, and some of the others been external, but there's some digestible wireless devices that could also help in telemedicine as well by wirelessly transmitting. How come they wouldn't necessarily enjoy the same type of success as the neurovigil with regards to clinical trials and collecting all types of body system stats as a part of a clinical trial, and the impact on those, similar impact, I would assume?
Well, there may be several answers. The first one that comes to mind when you say digestible devices is Proteus Biomedical. And for all of you who may not know that, it's a company that has a couple of core technologies, but one of them is focused around putting a radio in a pill that costs about a penny a pill. And when that pill hits your stomach, stomach acids unleash this radio, which is made out of silicon, it's basically food, and it delivers, I don't know, a few hundred bytes of information. So time, date, stamp, location, who you are, because it delivers it to a wearable device. And in that case, I mean, that has tremendous impact from a therapeutic and from a discovery perspective. But well over $200 million of investment months and months of time, who knows how much attorney's fees, and they're still working with FDA to get the first product to market. So that's one example, whereas an external EEG doesn't do anything, right? Everybody knows it's there. What you do with the algorithm, the marketing materials obviously have to be regulated. So just to, that's the first one that comes to mind, is that the promise is there, but they're creating new space.
Yes.
About maybe 15 years ago, maybe it was a little longer, I remember listening to a kind of a crazy inventor that was ranting about how cell phones are really dangerous. And just recently the World Health Organization reversed their decision about the health effects of mobile or radiated cell phones. Do you think that's going to make an impact, or what sort of general comments or thoughts you guys have about that?
I think it's, we just learned the news a few days ago. There was a concern raised about the use of a cell phone, the potential induced cancer, especially for a long time use of the cell phones. And I think it's that result is not very conclusive yet. And there are many ways in designing the communication devices, and basically that will present opportunity to the IT industry and telecom infrastructure companies. They can come up with the design of the antenna to take that into consideration, so the radiation can be radiated in a way away from the human body. Right? So you can imagine that is an additive device to ask for additional value attached to your existing cell phone. It can ask for additional $20. I think that's another marketing tool. I think it's always, the way I see is any challenge to the industry represent as a business opportunity for this community to invent new solutions. Remember, it's not technology, it's a solution to deliver the health care to the people.
Dr. Gurbaxani. My question is based on your modeling. Will wireless health actually reduce the cost of healthcare in this country from 18% of GDP to say 8%? And if the answer is yes, by when?
So there's a law that of forecasting, by the way, should either predict the magnitude or when, but never both.
Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Exactly. So you know, I mean, it's hard to know, right? Because I think, let me put it this way. When I was driving to this event, I was listening to Secretary Gates, and he's retiring as Secretary of Defense, and we get all hung up on the cost of war, but the thing that kind of surprised me about what he just said was the #1 cost for the military is the cost of healthcare, and he gave the numbers of kind of what it used to be 10 years ago to what it is now. So it's not just our corporations or universities, we're all kind of suffering through this. There's a real kind of challenge in the US, I think, so we have to use a political phrase, bend the cost curve. What the specific numbers are, I don't know. But what I will say is that I'm a big believer. 18 to 8 is aggressive. We certainly hope we can get there. But the thing that's powerful about the technologies we've been talking about, and that's one of the reasons that, when I was thinking about what I wanted to say today, I wanted to bring home the point of kind of general purpose technology, which is an economic kind of framing concept. You don't need to remember it after the next 2 minutes. But the idea really is that these technologies have increasing returns. So you make, just think about kind of when the real massive investment in the internet was made, kind of how many sequentials. So the internet before kind of, was not the World Wide Web, but now people don't even know what the difference between the web and the internet is if you're not a computer scientist, right? And we put application after application after application on those things and deliver tremendous data. I think the same thing will happen. For me, kind of the main technology trends, so not an exact answer to your question, we now have intelligence in the pockets of the consumers or the hands of the consumers, and we have amazing intelligence on the cloud, right? And I think we're really looking at huge kind of economic opportunity around the impact of technology. So I think The harder question, and perhaps Dr. Lott can answer this because the physicians in the room can answer this better, is really how do we reform the darn system, right? And there's a lot of research that shows, for example, that closed-end healthcare systems like Kaiser actually are better adopters of technology and get better return, better kind of results than the fragmented healthcare system that we have. So if you see a particular doctor in a different radiologist, they can't even share information. So, but I think that there's tremendous potential. We have a multi-million-dollar proposal in the National Science Foundation submitted last week, actually earlier this Monday, I know Tuesday, focusing on how do we build socio-technical infrastructure. So it's not just the infrastructure, how do we change social practices around any particular application in healthcare and education are the two big fields we're talking about. So, sorry, not exact answers.
Maybe I can add a few comments on that. The traditional healthcare we are familiar with is a sort of a top-down approach. Hospital and physician is at the center and with a specialist and treating the patients. But for the future healthcare, for lower cost and higher quality, it will be bottom up. Patient will take active role. The family of the patient will take active role to manage the health and wellness of the members. And that is witnessed by the advancement in the internet technology, in the cell phone technology. When we empower individuals, how we transform the society. And we know that's coming. And what is technology needed is really come up with seamless integrated solutions. Right? So right now we talk about is wireless solutions, but think about for any patient come home with a cell phone, and at home probably they want to watch TV. So how can you turn on the TV at the same time, have the same service as you receive from your cell phones? Right? You can talk to the doctors on your cell phone, on your TVs, or on your laptop. And this is a solution seamlessly integrated through different platforms. Every one of us are using it for entertainment purpose. At the same time, it can be used for managing our health care, for managing the energy usage at home. And this is the way we envision the future integrated solution in the smart home.
Just make a brief comment. I think one of the initial steps with these new technologies is to establish their reliability. And I believe that most physicians will demand reliability data before they actually use the technologies. So the simplest example would be the digital stethoscope. Can the auscultation of the heart, is it just as good? Can the same diagnosis be made as in person? It turns out in this case, the digital stethoscope is better than the regular ones that doctors carry around in there. But I would suggest that these reliability studies need to be established early on. Will the visual give you the same reliability for a sleep study as going to the sleep lab? And establishing that early on in these technologies will go a long way, at least in convincing the medical profession to use them.
Can I just make one comment too about the amount of money that's spent on caring for disease could be hugely reduced if we would spend a lot more money on preventing disease. You remember what I said about when I studied the musculoskeletal system and the demands on it is to prevent injury because it costs a lot less to prevent it than it does to treat it. And a lot of these technologies and future ones will be very useful in measuring compliance, for example, to preventive healthcare management. I mean, that's a great opportunity where we're focusing on how are we helping patients achieve a goal to prevent their disease process or to change their behaviors so that their healthcare or so that their health improves. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity, and we need to take a lot closer look at that because frankly, if we're not focusing on how we can stop the disease process, then we're going to end up with an awful, much higher healthcare outlay. So just want to add that in as something that can be very useful for this type of technology to be applied.
Let me just add to that before you go. So just very quickly, so how many of you are familiar with this product called Fitbit? Some of you. So it's this little thing that you carry around, actually measures roughly kind of how much movement you have in any given day. And I was just thinking what we just discussed, if we could link that in theory to kind of your insurance premium. Right? So right now, there are companies that are experimenting. So there are companies that are experimenting. You're willing to put tracking devices in your car, so they know where you're traveling, what speeds you're doing. You will get a reduction or an increase.
Invasion of privacy.
But you're volunteering for it, right? But the point is, if you know somebody is extremely active, I mean, in some sense, you want to reward them for their behavior, and you want to penalize somebody who's not getting any exercise and is actually hurting the health system. And there's a whole bunch of things you've got to think about. But I'm just saying, these technologies are very, very powerful for prevention, but only if you kind of change the whole system, like the insurance system around it. It's a long way off, but I think we'll begin to see stuff. Like, to Rob's point, you know, business, most products will be services. I mean, I think all of these fall into that, under that rubric.
Exactly. We had a question.
Yeah, I'm interested to know how much effort is being spent to deal with the contradiction between wanting to protect your IP versus having a platform so that these things can actually grow. So if we have a platform that the FDA approves, then we can get much better acceptance of this. How much effort is being spent on dealing with that issue?
Yeah, I'll comment on that, and then anybody else wants to chime in. The role of IP is interesting because it plays a critical role in the cycle of bringing a product to market. You know, an example is methods of treating the human body are not patentable in Europe. That's what the law says. Methods of treating the human body are patentable in this country. This is where all the medical methods originate. And the theory in Europe behind not allowing them to be patentable was, well, we want medical care to be available to everybody. But no one invents it except on a random basis. You know, every population has a certain rate of invention. And what we found in our system is that you put that rate of invention on steroids if you provide an economic incentive. Now you have capital. With the infusion of capital, you have an opportunity to fund research and development and bring products to market. If you don't have capital, you can't do that except at a very slow pace. And so the capital, you say, look, what's the driver that brings capital into an entrepreneurial effort? And one of the big ones in the medical device space is the availability of patents. I work constantly with the venture capital guys doing diligence on investment and acquisition deals, and it's a huge criteria. They don't want to invest in a product that's not adequately patented. And so yes, there's a conflict. Patents prevent you from taking advantage of something that I invented and I got the patent on it. But the reality is, because I was able to get the patent, I could attract the capital to actually bring the product to market and provide health care.
But isn't that, I mean, sort of a false economy? Because if everybody has to go through the same FDA process and spend millions of dollars trying to get through it, everybody gets hurt by that. So.
Well, yeah, the regulatory process is another problem. and in fact, it's gotten to the point now where we were having a conversation before the panel here. There's a lot of startup companies today in this country who are not even considering launching their product in this country. It's not a new paradigm. They say, forget that. We'll get CE mark approval in Europe. We can generate revenue OUS outside the United States. And in the startup model, startup paradigm, your goal is typically to get acquired, not to run a business for the rest of your life. And so the thinking is, well, we'll generate proof of principle, we'll generate market adoption rate data, we'll generate human response data and revenue outside the United States, and we'll let the buyer, the Abbott's, the Boston Scientifics, the Guy, whoever is, Cordis, Stryker, we'll let them figure out the problem of getting through the U.S. regulatory process. So we're actually, through our delay in the U.S. regulatory process, exporting both jobs and healthcare. In a very real way, I think it's a problem. Yes, Nick?
Are there still legal obstacles for a physician to practice using telemedicine to cross state lines?
So the question was legal obstacles across state lines. As we sit here, you have to have a license in a different state before you can practice telemedicine. Now, even before that, let's just take this California Telehealth Network. There's 830 clinics. Until recently, for a doctor to be credentialed at these different clinics, credentialing now takes up to 10 months. So you're talking about 8,300 months of credentialing for a doctor to be able to serve this system. So there was a great deal of screaming about that. And this year, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid approved for telemedicine what's called proxy credentialing. So that means if you're credentialed, for example, at UCI Medical Center or UCLA, and there is an official contract established between that center and a community clinic, you can be proxy credentialing. That little item alone was holding back the application of telemedicine. So I think it's an example where policy has to catch up with the technology.
Are the state medical associations very supportive of this idea?
State medical associations are, in theory, quite supportive. The federal government is quite supportive. But they're battleships. All of these are battleships, so they turn very slowly. So this action by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, I think, was a major step.
So may I pile on and say something slightly controversial, because this raises the topic of the cost issue. It's not necessarily about technology, it's about policy and regulation. And I've said this before, but if you're going to rationalize the U.S. healthcare system, of course you get change fee for service and modify that. But even before you got there, you focus on the corporate practice of medicine prohibition, which prohibits in virtually every state non-professional corporations from employing physicians to practice medicine to deliver services. You would eliminate state-by-state licensure, because that prevents the creation of rational structures, even inside the United States, of networks of providers that can provide services at any time, anywhere. And this Medicare reimbursement will kill a home health company that I created about 10 years ago, because it just took so long to get people, new physicians credentialed, just to get paid. So there's a lot of other things that you would do, and this is part of it. And this is business and regulatory transformation in order to get to the real goal.
I've been making Shelley run around. Let me let her pass the microphone.
I think this gentleman here.
I was going to comment, first I appreciate that there was a business aspect to this discussion today, because part of this parallels a lot of the discussion around electronic medical records. And I can remember, actually, I worked at Medtronic for many years. 15 years ago, a lot of these technologies, we had a strategic plan that envisioned a lot of this, but the biggest barrier to investment was in the value chain analysis. Who is going to pay for this stuff, because it's not a capitalistic market, and the policies and the benefit that comes versus where the money comes from is a big disconnect. And I think that one of the challenges for this area as well is going to be, how do you actually unlock the value in terms of getting paid for what you're creating here? I don't know if anybody has a particular comment on that, but it just seems like that's going to be a big barrier to the adoption opportunities here.
So I'll take credit at that. So I think digital medicine, if you will, is going to begin to change a lot in healthcare, even in the United States. And it already has in certain respects. If you talk to Medtronic or St. Jude or Boston, every single one of those companies has got a service business with a bedside monitor that collects information from implanted devices and delivers it to the cloud, where people can do stuff with it, or algorithms of people. Every one of them complains. No one pays us for this. We don't get paid any more for that. But we have to do it. Why? Because the electrophysiologists want it, the cardiologists want it, the patients want it if they know about it. And the outcomes are, Leslie Saxon at USC did a study of about 190,000 patients, 5-year study, and amazing improvement in, or decrease in mortality with this model versus the disconnected model that requires you to go in every 90 days, which most people don't. And still, both models are still being constructed. They complain, but they've done it because they have to. So sometimes, right, even healthcare companies do the right thing because it makes their product and service better, just like the consumer world does. Sometimes it actually works. And so that's going to do it. But more broadly, I think there's going to be a fundamental change in healthcare because of access to healthcare knowledge by consumers. You know, this isn't WebMD and it's not even Mayo.com, but we have the tools now to organize medical knowledge and make it accessible. And that is going to happen. And when that happens, then you think about, I don't know, what's the 80% plus of diagnosis is done basically with H&P, kind of heuristically. So it's based on information that is owned by the patient and that is modulated by a clinician. And I think the technological tools exist to actually organize not just one physician's knowledge, but virtually the totality of knowledge, and make it accessible to that individual that owns, you know, all data. And then start answering questions. Well, what I have, what may I have, what might I have, who should I go see, what are the, you know, best diagnostics and all of that. And that's going to start changing everything because it'll shift power, move diagnosis towards, you know, free. And you start focusing on therapies and therapies that work. And then the business models change pretty rapidly, and it's happened in other industries, and so I don't know why it won't happen in healthcare.
So to stay with the point of consumerization of technology, I think one of the things that I think we should think about, so I actually have a radical proposal that I think should have been tried, which is rather than giving $40,000 to physicians and $2.5 million to hospitals to automate their practice, how many of you actually don't work in healthcare and got paid to buy your computers and your information system, right? So there's no other industry in which we get subsidized to actually go out and automate. So that kind of suggests to me there's some kind of funky incentive system going on there. But more to the point, instead of giving $40,000 or $2.5 million, I think should have given each patient a couple of $1,000s to go out and get Google Health Vault and Microsoft's Health equivalent cloud product. And then we would go out and demand from our physicians that they actually, and the data is ours. Right? And then because we have the biggest stake in our whole thing. I'm not that it's a provocative idea, but I think to Rob's point, if it's when the patients or the consumers start demanding more that we will kind of get some of the payoffs that we're talking about and the resulting investment.
So
if you take a device like the dual fertility device that was mentioned, where it can be rapidly commercialized, brought to market, adopted, and I'm guessing profitable pretty quickly, do you think that will set de facto standards that would either set the path or set the course for other devices that will take longer to bring to market?
I hope so. I mean, it's inevitable. It's inevitable unless we continue to maintain all of the barriers to innovation in healthcare that we have now. They're trade barriers, they're regulatory barriers. You know, it's Rube Goldberg, right, created these devices that look like 19th century devices, but they did 21st century activities. They flew under the ocean and up in space. The healthcare industry, the U.S. healthcare industry, is just the opposite. We have 21st century devices, but we're operating in a 19th century environment. And it's because it's managed, it's controlled by tinkers and tailors, doctors. It's trades. And some of these laws were mentioned before. It's well-meaning, first do no harm, but also don't harm my income. So I'm going to regulate I'm going to draw silos around states, around counties, around clinics, around areas of practice. And, you know, there's a reason for all of that that's very legitimate, but it's gone too far. So, you know, all of that is going to change. And it's the power of the consumer. And people will be better served in other countries, and eventually patients, consumers who are actually voters are going to realize in the U.S. and when they start making some change.
This is a quick question for the panel. I don't know if there's a real answer to this as well, but I think what you're just describing, Rob, and there clearly are barriers all across the way, and we need to kind of blow up the system. But you have people who are the true innovators and early adopters in terms of the market itself. Do you think that there's going to be a period here of even greater disparity of access where those people who are willing to pay for it, who are knowledgeable, and go to Google Health and go to other places and actually contract for concierge medicine and all that sort of thing are the way of the future, and there's a huge gap before the rest of the population catches up? Is that a potential scenario we're facing?
I think that's reality, yeah, sure.
I think it's the typical business model for the healthcare. Right now, it's still a top-down model. It's payers and insurance company, hospital, and doctor driving the delivery part of the healthcare. And I think the technology we're talking about here is to empower consumers. What if we follow Vijay's suggestions? Government provide incentive to the user consumers, say $500, allow us to upload our health records to Google Health or to Microsoft Health Vault. And we have full control of our privacy information we want to share. At the same time, we can use the technology coming from the telecom infrastructure and consumer electronics. It's such a low-cost solution. We can collect the information of our health condition and can be uploaded to the cloud computing with intelligence. And at that time, basically, suddenly we see the healthcare provider. They say, I can use that information to help you. Right? I think it's suddenly we transform the entire way to deliver the healthcare and the way we receive the healthcare. And so far, we are still thinking it's traditional way, top-down, organized by the government. It's not empowered by the consumer, but from today's presentation, we see it's coming, and technology is at our hand. And we just have not thought about how to tell government, say, provide incentive to us. Like $500 per family, we can do it.
I think I'm getting word we have time for about one more question, and then we're going to have to reconvene out in the courtyard.
I was hoping you guys could have some fun with predicting the impact of IBM's Watson in medical diagnosis and the tricorder X Prize.
No one wants to take that.
Does everybody know what the tricorder X Prize is? So Qualcomm just announced this with the X Prize Foundation that they funded the study to figure out what the prize parameters will be. And it's envisioned as a 3 to 5 year project with a $10 million prize. So it's, you have this. I mean, it's an idea that's intended to stretch the industry and technology in interesting ways. But some of those elements exist. Now, Watson, I think, is more interesting for healthcare, and that comes down not just. I think we can organize those. I think it's going to be. It's much more difficult. It's going to be more labor intensive than doing it by artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a very important, probably increasing role. But I think you have to have actual, real people, qualified clinicians, appropriately credentialed to actually create this and get it going. And then over time, artificial intelligence can play a larger and larger role. But just in order to think about commercializing, how do you get the confidence, whether it's used as direct-to-consumer or as a clinical decision tool? You have to have the confidence of and trust of people. So it's going to be clinician-driven at its core to begin with. Lots of business.
But wouldn't you love to see a probability of correctness on every diagnosis that you get?
I think it's the way we view the whole thing is in the future of the way we monitoring the health condition of people. And we have a very rich data, and we may end up with the society with information overload. Too much information. As a result, we don't know how to act. I think it's definitely we have to head in the direction is how do we use the existing infrastructure, cloud computing, and how we do the data mining, allow us to make the data into actionable data. The thing about we continue to monitor the conditions, and we have months of records of patient condition, and doctor has only 5 minutes to review the data. Right, so how to deduce the information from that records, right, and make that as an actionable assistive technology to the doctors. Right, so to us, I think that is the technology we see is coming, and so far we don't have a very good handle of that issue yet. And so Watson is one step forward, but still a long way to go.
So I think on the ultimate question that a lot of people ask, which is what can we do, if anything, to move progress faster towards greater telecommunication utilization in medicine and e-health? And I think what I'm hearing from the panel and from my own practice, I see that unlike a single company, when you're looking at a product and trying to decide how to get market penetration, there's usually fairly focalized barriers to getting that product on the market. But in the case of a lot of the e-health technologies, the complexity is the complexity of the barriers. Sometimes it's physician acceptance. They want to see the proof first so that there's a slow adoption rate. Sometimes it's regulatory, whether it's practicing across state lines or 50 other reasons. Sometimes it's a lack of conformity between standards, nothing talks to anything else. And sometimes it's a lack of capital. People won't spend the money to bring the technology forward. And so I think that's really the ultimate barrier that's slowing down the progress. The interesting thing is, to me, it's not a technological barrier. The technology, as was said earlier, is way ahead of our ability to deliver it in a meaningful way. And that leads to part of the complexity here. I think what we need to do now is go outside where dinner will be served, and then eventually wander upstairs to the second and third floors where there will be some interesting exhibits on display, and you'll be able to see some of the toys firsthand. Thank you.